Hello and welcome back to my Dandelion Diaries. We are continuing on with the season 2 ink exploration, and as voted on the community poll, we are going to be doing teal inks next. I'm only going to be doing samples today. I was really tempted to throw in some bottles that I have, but I really want to include as many brands as possible, and I have more brands when it comes to samples. So we're doing 22 inks. And then I have normal supplies here, my A5 Hobonichi notebook with the original Tomoe River paper. We're getting so close to the end that I'm having to flip the book on itself so I can have a flat writing surface. I'm going to be using my Kakimori brass tip pen today with the aluminum handle, a pipette dropper, the stamp block that I've been doing to make the littler swatches since I'm doing so many inks, white t-shirt as my towel, and then a couple of jars of water. I do also want to preface in this video that I am in a thunderstorm right now, so if there's any flashes of light or bangs or anything, it's just the weather outside, kind of like ambiance. I'm going to try to edit out as much as I can, but it is going to be what it's going to be, so here we go. The first ink I have today is a Vanessa exclusive. This is by Vinta, and it is called Kislap. And this ink is light, but it has some shading that makes it a little bit more legible in some areas. It also has beautiful shimmer. The shimmer in this is almost like an aqua silver color. It is beautiful. This is a very mermaid-esque ink to me. If you wanted to have like a page looking like you just wrote it under the sea, this is 100% that ink. I've talked about Vinta a little bit as a brand. I'm not super familiar with a lot of their inks. The ones that I have tried have been really nice. They flow really well. Even the shimmer one, I've never had any issues with a pen. Granted, I typically put shimmer inks in broader nibbed pens unless I just know really well how that shimmer ink behaves. But yeah, this is a good one. The color is a little bit light, so if you don't like lighter inks, maybe steer away from this one. Next up, we have Inkebara Air. And I personally really adore this ink for its simplicity. So it has some nice shading that's pretty within the same color family. It's still within that kind of teal turquoisey family. But the color of this reminds me a lot of just like a beautiful blue sky on a beach. Like it's just very like calming blue to me, or teal in this case. It does have a little bit more of a blue side than a green side. So it's kind of it's iffy whether you would really want to include this in the teals versus the maybe light blues, but I do think this one has quite a bit of a green lean to it in some of the shading that it makes it a little bit more towards the teal side, but you know, to each his own when it comes to discerning what's a teal ink. Next up we have another L'Artisan ink. This is Encre Classique's Bleu Lagon. And again, this one may be considered a little bit more towards the lighter blue side, but it does have a very, I don't know, oceanic, watery look to me. Lagoon look, if you will. It's definitely a water-esque kind of ink. L'Artisan as a brand, I've talked about a few times now. It is definitely a nice, inexpensive brand, at least if you're in the States. They have quite a range of colors, and the flow on these is really quite nice. I do wish some of them had a bit more shading, like this one does, but that's for another time. The color of this ink is beautiful and blue with a little bit of a green undertone. It definitely has, like I said, that watery, oceanic, lagoon-like look. Very, very nice shading going on with it too. It even has a little bit of haloing, but we'll discuss a little bit more about that once the ink has dried. Overall though, really like this one, and it is a great choice if you want a more inexpensive, like tealy light blue ink. Next up we have Troublemaker's Copper Patina. And this is a beautiful, nice, green-leaning teal color. It has kind of like this goldish, almost coppery like shimmer in it, but not something so coppery that it's orange. It definitely leans more towards the yellowy, goldy side. The shading in this is really nice, and honestly, Troublemaker as a brand, I don't usually have a whole lot of issues with other than it's dry. But for some reason with this ink in particular, I always have problems in pens. And I believe Simone even talked about this when she was trying it out either in a 30 inks 30 days. I think it was on her Instagram that I saw it and she was talking about it, but it does not behave the best in pens. I don't know if it's because the ink is dry with shimmer on top of that. I don't know. I particularly like using this for calligraphy practice because it's really fun and shimmery and it has nice shading and it's just a beautiful, nice patina-y color. But yeah, I don't really like this one in pens, but the color of this is beautiful and the shimmer with it is beautiful as well. Next up, we have Kaweco's Paradise Blue. And the color of this one is very much, again, that marine oceanic vibe, kind of like a very teal toned water. Like it's beautiful. I honestly feel like this looks really close to the true color of a like turquoise gemstone, kind of maybe a little bit darker. Kaweco as a brand though is really nice. A lot of their inks have some really nice shading, this one included, and they do offer most of their inks in cartridge form, which I find to be really fantastic, especially if you like using them in the Kaweco pens because they're so small. The converters don't hold as much ink as the cartridges do. Anyways, I also really like that they have a very limited amount of colors. So part of me wants to take the colors that I do have and mix them together to create new colors and see what I can come up with, but maybe that's a video for another time. But overall, I really like this ink in particular because of its shading and also that it is very legible, being that it is still a lighter teal colored ink. Next up, we have Herbin's Diablo Menthe. And this is again one of those more light turquoise aqua colored inks. It is beautiful. I do find the Herbin inks to be a little bit on the dry side, but this one in particular doesn't really have that effect for me. It's pretty much standard flow. Compared to the other ink that's close to this on the page right now, which is the Inkebara Air, Diablo Menthe is a bit greener and it doesn't have quite the level of shading that Air does. But it does have a really nice, consistent like color throughout. It's very much a true aqua, light turquoise color, and like I said, the flow is pretty standard. I do think there are other inks that I would prefer more over this one, just in this color family alone, but this is a really nice ink, and especially if you like the Herbin brand or it's a reasonable buy for you, it's a good quality one from them, and I don't have any dryness with it whatsoever. Next, we have a new-ish to me ink. This is courtesy of Allison over at Little Coco Studio, so thank you so much for sending this. This is Dominant Industries Chicken in the Sky with Diamonds, which is a Wonder Pens exclusive, which they are located in Canada. And this is honestly one of my favorite teal inks now. So I have not put this in a pen, but the shading that it has in the swatch and in the dip pens I've tried it with has just been amazing. And I'll save the shading for a surprise when we get to the dried swatches. But the flow of Dominant Industry inks is amazing. They are very well flowing, very wet, juicy inks. And they always have a good consistency no matter what they put them in. Like, I don't know. I will say that the only thing I wish this ink had is shimmer. Just because the name says diamonds, like I wanted to have shimmer. But I know that the exclusiveness of this to Wonder Pens is based on the 2 cats that Wonder Pens have in their shops. And I believe the color of this is based on the eye color of those cats, which is pretty nifty if you ask me. Pretty cool. Next up, we have Wearingeul's Robinson Crusoe. And this is another one of those kind of like watery, teal, oceanic colors, very aqua-y, close to the Paradise Blue, kind of close to the Blue Lagoon, a little bit darker than Air and Diablo Menthe, but it's a beautiful color nonetheless. It does have a little bit of shading going on with it, and Wearingeul as a brand, I find their inks to be really great. Some of them are a little bit dry, but most of them are pretty okay. This is one I consider to be more on the wet side, actually. It's not dry at all in anything I've tried it with. The color of this, though, like I said, is more towards that oceanic blue. There is little hints of like greenish undertone in here too, which is why I consider it more of a teal. But to some, this actually may be more of a blue. So kind of up for debate on this one. Next up, we have Sailor Ink Studios number 264. And this ink is a very interesting one. It almost has a dustiness to it, or even like a washed out look in some areas, which I find really unique. And Sailor Ink Studio has several colors that I would consider teal, but I really wanted to showcase this one because it is a bit lighter, but it's still legible because of the shading, which again, I'll wait to describe all of the shading once we get to the dried swatching or dried viewpoints. But this ink is such an interesting color because it has again, that dustiness to it. So there's areas that are a little bit more of the gray side, but it also has a bit more of that aqua-y, watery teal color, but also a little bit more of the darker teal colors. It's a very interesting ink, which if you are unfamiliar with the Sailor brand, is very common with a lot of their inks. Next up, we have Robert Oster's Tranquility. This ink in particular, the Tranquility ink, is a beautiful green teal color, has a little bit of shading, has some beautiful properties, and just, I love the color of this. I don't know how else to describe it other than it's just kind of like the dusk over the ocean kind of thing, where you get that nice teal line above the ocean water before the sun sets. Like, it's beautiful. I just really adore this ink. Robert Oster as a brand is very awesome. I love every ink I've ever tried from them. They have really cool shaders. Their shimmer inks are really good. The only thing that I have noticed lately, at least with the shimmer inks, is that I have to store my pens upright, otherwise they start clogging, which is pretty common with shimmer inks in general. And after that, we have another really good one, and this is Diamine Marine. And this ink has, again, that very oceanic blue look to it. Marine is a fabulous name for this ink. It is a bit more of the blue side versus the green side of teal, but it is stunning. It does have a very minor sheen in some cases. I don't know if we'll get that in the swatch today, but the color of this is great. And Diamine as a brand is tried and true, been around forever. They have a gajillion colors, and this one is a really good one that I think is a pretty popular one, honestly, when it comes to teal inks from Diamine. The flow of this is great. The color of this is great. Has a little bit of shading. Like I said, it has minor sheen in some areas, and just, yes, great choice. And after that, we have Pelikan Edelstein's Apatite. And this is a nice aqua-y turquoise color. Has some light areas, has some dark areas, good shading. And the fact that it is Pelikan Edelstein, it's going to be good quality, if not a little bit dry though. I find that the Pelikan Edelstein inks like either have really good flow or they're dry. I think you get one or the other depending on the color. This one is kind of like in the middle. I don't know, it's probably more on the dry side for me. The shading in this one is lovely though. It is kind of close to Diamine Marine, but a little bit more green. It definitely has more of those like yellowy green undertones, almost like a darker version of the Inkebara Air maybe. It's hard to describe. I do like this one. I don't really reach for this one often enough just because I have some other favorites, but it is a nice, good quality teal ink, and if you like the Pelikan brand, go for it. I mean, I don't think you could go wrong. It's just a little bit on the dry side for me. Next up, we have an ink that I mixed myself, and this is by Birmingham Pen Companies. This followed their recipe for their ink called Aqueduct, and I feel like this is one of my ultimate favorite teal inks now. And I say that primarily because of the shading in this ink. It is just so beautiful. Birmingham Pen Company as a brand has been on my favorites for like the past 6 months now, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. The only downside is that they don't have the international shipping. I wish they had international shipping. Just because I know there's so many people who want to try these inks. Anyways, onto the ink itself. The shading in this is beautiful. It has a kind of like aqua-y base, maybe a little bit like a dark aqua, more turquoisey side, but when the shading goes down, it has green and blue and gray and yellow, and it's just like a really fun, dynamic ink, and just, I love it so much. This is the only reason I have not bought the bottle of Robert Oster's Tranquility, if I'm being honest, because these inks are kind of close together, and if I can make my own version of that with the Birmingham Pen Company inks I already have, there's no sense in me buying a bottle from Robert Oster. Even though they're not quite the same, they're just kind of close. But more on that when the inks have dried down. Next up, we have Lamy Turquoise. And initially swatching this one, it looks blue. It looks very, very blue. But I find it to have a little bit of a green lean once it dries down, just in some of the areas of shading. But I think compared to a lot of the stuff on the page today, it's going to look very blue. The thing about Lamy is depending on the ink line, you're going to get a lot of saturation, or it's going to look a little bit more wishy-washy. I find their standard line of inks to be a little bit more on the wishy-washy side, and that their like more specialty line of inks like the gemstones, or I think they had like a fruits one, like their Lamy mango is really saturated. Those ones typically have a bit more of a saturation to them in that they show up a bit darker. Next up, we have a very well-known ink, and this is J. Herbin's Emerald of Chivor. And this ink is popular because of the properties. It is a crazy ink. So this ink has shimmer that's kind of like a goldish color, and it also has a bright red sheen going on. And the base of the ink is definitely kind of like a nice dark teal with a little bit of shading to like a little bit of a lighter teal. Honestly, really fun dynamic ink. I think this ink's actually a little bit harder to find nowadays, at least from what I've seen from other people. But I personally, it's an okay ink to me. I guess it's not a wow factor for me just because I've seen so many inks at this point. It is fun, it's dynamic, and it is definitely a classic, you know, crazy ink. But it's just not that exciting to me personally. Next up, we have Noodler's Turquoise. And this is a nice darker teal color, turquoise color, aqua color, whatever you want to categorize it as. But Noodler's as a brand is one I have been steering away from just because I just cannot get these inks to dry down for me. I got a comment from Priscilla, and I want to thank her for suggesting this about adding a dilution solution to these inks. I have not yet tried it, but if you have tried putting dilution solution in them to make them a little bit different in flow, please let us know in the comments, because I think that might be a great solution to making Noodler's inks more usable in general. I'm going to try it too. I want to see if anybody else has. The color of Noodler's Turquoise is definitely more on the darker teal side. It does have a little bit of a sheen going on with it too, not super strong, but it's a nice dark turquoise, dark teal color. Not my favorite, probably because of the brand, but if you like Noodler's, I think this is a really pretty color. Next up, we have Ferris Press's Tumultuous Tides. And this is another one of those, you know, oceanic, watery, marine colored teal turquoise aqua colors. I don't love this one. Ferris Press has a humongous range of blue, teal, green inks. I mean, it's massive at this point. And a lot of their inks have shimmer, and this one has shimmer as well. Tumultuous Tides has shimmer. But the color of this one, I guess, is so similar to other inks that I don't really reach for it. And it's a bit pricier considering this is part of their fairy tale line. So with Ferris Press, there's the standard line and then there's the fairy tale line. The fairy tale lines are usually in the smaller 20 ml bottles, and they cost like more than $1 a milliliter, which is expensive. But I will say this is another one of those mermaidy inks. It's definitely got that mermaid tail vibe, you know, oceanic pearls, like sparkles. It's a very beautiful ink. It's just, I don't reach for this one because there's other ones I like better. And just because the price point on this is a little bit, you know, out of my price range when I go for an ink, if I'm being honest. Next up, we have another one of my favorites, and this is Taccia's Hokusai Sabimidori. And this is one of my favorites because it is like a chameleon ink. It is so cool. So it has sheen, it has a little bit of shading going on with it, but primarily it's when you like look at it from different angles, it looks like a different color. Very, very unique. If you have one of those like swirly pens with green, blue, and red in it, this ink is amazing for it. I'm just saying. I love this ink. Taccia as a brand is really nice. They have great flowing inks, very wet, very lovely consistency, almost satiny when you write with them. It's lovely. The only thing is they can be a little bit more on the pricey side just because it is more of a luxury brand, and the pens that they produce are a bit more on the luxury side as well. Beautiful ink though. Really, really, really love this color, and it is definitely a fantastic dynamic ink, which you'll see more of when this dries down. After that, we have Three Oysters Marine Green. And I find marine green to be a really nice shading ink. Like most of Three Oysters inks, they have a kind of dynamic ink property, either be shading or sheen, and this one is definitely more on the shady side. I honestly love the bottles by Three Oysters and that they can like have the corner cut so you can sit on its side. Very cool, unique bottle. I really like this one. I think I like some other Three Oysters inks better, like their Delicious Mustard is one of my favorites, or I Color You Doldum is another one of my favorites, but this one is a really nice shader as well. Next up, we have Private Reserve's Blue Suede. And this ink reminds me of the song Blue Suede Shoes by Elvis Presley. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the name, but it does. The color of this is definitely more on the blue leaning teal side with a little bit of green in the shading bits. But it's a really nice consistency. Private Reserve is one I don't typically have issues with in terms of a brand. They're a great price. They have lots of colors, but I have recently learned, I guess, that they are close to the pH or consistency of Noodler's brand in some areas. So I don't know how I feel about that now. But I've never had any issues with Private Reserve inks. If anything, they're just really wet flowing. This ink in particular, again, is that kind of more blue leaning teal side. It does have a little bit of a sheen, but it's just a really pretty color. And I like that it reminds me of an Elvis song because that's always really fun. Next up, we have Color Versus Gravity Wave. And this is another one of those darker teal colors, but it definitely has a bit more of a green lean to it in some areas. I personally don't reach for this one very often. I find it to be kind of bland when it comes to Colorverse ink, and they have some of my favorite ones like Colorverse Andromeda. But this one's okay. It does have a little bit of a sheen for it as well. It's on the red side, but it's just a nice teal ink with red sheen. So if you like this brand, go for it. Otherwise, I think there's some other ones that are a little bit better, if I'm being honest. And this one honestly has a little bit of a dryness to it when I've used it in pens as well. So not something that I typically reach for, but the color of this is a really nice fit for this category for sure. And the last ink I have for today is Alanine by Organic Studio. And this ink is a nice color for this category too. It's more on the blue side of the teal, but it has that red sheen, which is really common with Organic Studio blue to teal inks. I think previously I've swatched Organic Studio's Henry David Thoreau's Walden, which is one of my favorite teals with a red sheen. But the only thing that I find with this brand of inks, at least this color range from this brand, is they don't really dry very well. The sheen smears a lot, which is kind of disappointing. I want my sheen to stay where it is, not be smearing across the page. Anyways, very pretty color, nice shading, good red sheen, and just a nice overall just addition to this category. Okay, I'm gonna let these finish drying down and I'll be back to do close-ups. And then once we review all of these dried down, I'll do the previous season of teal inks and we'll compare some swatches with that too. But I'll see you guys in a minute. Okay, I am back. I'm gonna zoom in, do some close-ups of all of these, and then we're gonna go back to season 1 to compare some swatches too. Starting off, we had Vinta Kislap, which is a Vanessa exclusive. I adore the mermaid vibes of this one. It definitely has very strong, almost aqua-y silver shimmer, and the shading in this is really great because it goes from that kind of like light, I don't know, gray blue color to more of a like darker gray blue color. I would definitely say the base of this is not aqua. It's the shimmer that makes this one kind of like in that teal aqua family. But it is beautiful, a little bit light, but a really nice color nonetheless. And then we had Inkebara Air. I really enjoy this one because of the shading. It has areas where it looks a bit more green and areas where it looks a bit more blue. Has a little bit of blue haloing going on. Definitely a fun ink because it's just a nice aqua-y color. A little bit light though, so again, if you're not a fan of lighter inks, don't go for this one. Then we had L'Artisan's Blue Lagoon. This one definitely looks a lot more blue than all of its neighbors, and it's because it is a bit more blue. I don't remember this one being this blue, if I'm being honest. I remembered it having a bit more of a greenness to it, so I don't know if it's just this swatch or maybe when I did it on other papers, it has a bit more of a greenness to it. Nonetheless, it's a beautiful light color. Could be considered more of just a blue turquoise, really up to the eyes of the beholder. Then we had Troublemaker's Copper Patina. Again, here's that shimmer. It's a bit more of a yellow gold color than copper, but I think it is still considered coppery. The patina is definitely more of that turquoise background. It has a little bit of shading too when it dries down, but it's not enough. I talked about this one too when I was doing the wet swatch, that it just has trouble in pens. I never have a good experience with this one in pens. I don't know why. I've had other Troublemaker shimmery inks. Troublemaker's Polar Lights is one of my favorite black shimmering inks. And I don't know what it is about this one. It just does not behave very well in pens. But in dip pens and like calligraphy practice and swatching, it's really, really fun. Then we have Kaweco's Paradise Blue. Adore the Kaweco brand just because their inks are in cartridges, and that's a game changer for a lot of people. But this one has really nice shading, which is common with the Kaweco inks. It has almost, again, that yellowy shade in the center. It does have a bit of a darker blue haloing, and there's a little bit of a red sheen pulling through right here, but I've never had it sheen in anything, so I don't know if that's just like a one-off experience right now. But shading in this one is very lovely. Great flow on this one. Absolutely lovely. Then we had Herbin's Diablo Menthe. This is a nice minty aqua-y color. I don't love this, if I'm being honest. It's just too light for me, but the flow on this one's really great, which a lot of Herbin inks struggle to be a little bit dry for me. This one is not the case. It is definitely a good flow. It's not wet, but it's not dry. The color of this is just a little too light for my taste, but it is a great light aqua-y color if you wanted to do any kind of painting with like ocean water or a nice sea foam color. This is kind of close to that, just a little bit more on the blue side versus the green side. Then we had Dominant Industries Chicken in the Sky with Diamonds. I love this ink. Thank you, Allison, for sending me this. This is so fun. So the shading in this is so crazy because it goes from this greenish teal color to gray, like solid gray in the middle there, like a warm gray. And again, I wish it had a little bit of shimmer. Maybe I'll put a glitter potion in it or something and see how I can make it more fun. But I think this is such a unique color with the shading involved. It's just really fantastic. It is a Wonder Pens exclusive, and every time I see if I can get a bottle, they're sold out, so maybe they'll restock them sometime soon. I don't know, but I have a very generous sample from Allison to play with, at least for now. Next, we had Wearingeul's Robinson Crusoe. I love this ink. It's so fun because of the shading. So when it was wet, you probably noticed that it was all kind of one color in that kind of like aqua teal, like oceanic, light bluish kind of vibes. Now that it's dry, you see the green coming through, and the green is almost a yellow green. So it's very, I don't know, it's cool. I do find that the shading only really shows up in broad or stub nib pens. I don't really get this kind of greenish pockets in medium pens or anything finer than that, honestly. But it is a really fun ink if you wanted to put it in a broad or stub nib pen. Overall, though, Wearingeul inks tend to be kind of dry, but some of them kind of wet, and I find this one to be more on the wet side, so it's a winner in my book. Then we had Sailor Ink Studios 260. Again, this is one of those inks that is just really cool by Sailor. There's a few other Ink Studio Sailor inks that are teal, but I wanted to include this one specifically because one, shading, and two, it's a bit more dusty teal, which I find is really hard to find. Putting it next to the Chicken Ink Sky with Diamonds is actually really interesting that they both have that kind of gray shading going on, but the Sailor Ink Studio is definitely more of a cool gray, definitely more of a blue gray, and the base of this is definitely more of a lighter dusty teal color, dusty aqua color. Beautiful shading though, always pulls through, really fun, cool ink. Then we had Robert Oster's Tranquility, one of my favorites. Just the green teal vibes of this is beautiful. The shading is really nice, has red sheen going on, but not so strong that it takes over, and a lovely consistency. Again, I have another ink that I'm going to stick with instead of buying a bottle of this one, but if I didn't have the other ink, I would definitely buy a bottle because the Robert Oster River Fire is my favorite, and this is just the lighter version of that to me. Then we have Diamine Marine, I think favorite among many, honestly. It has really nice shading for a teal color. Diamine is a classic, tried and true brand. Just a really nice tealy, oceanic, blue-green color. Just very nice consistency. And then we had Pelikan Edelstein's Apatite. Again, this one's a bit dry for me personally, but the color of this is a really nice aqua-y green blue. The shading goes almost to a yellow in some areas, like a yellowy green, and it does have some nice haloing that's a little bit more of a darker blue color. Very nice ink. Kind of looks like Apatite, not really though. It's a little too light for the Apatite stone in general for me, but it's a nice ink. Then we had Birmingham Pen Company's Aqueduct, which is showing up way more green on camera. That's interesting. In person, it looks almost dead ringer for the Robert Oster Tranquility, but in the camera, it's looking very green. That's interesting. But it does have that shading that I was talking about. So it has shading that goes almost to yellow in some areas and then green in other areas. And then the base of it's more of like teal color, and it has a bit of a red sheen as well. This is my mix of this from the Aqueduct recipe on the Birmingham Pen Company website. So it may not be 100% true to this color, but it is interesting that it's showing more green on camera. I kind of want to do chromatography. I've been trying to get into chromatography, so maybe I'll do chromatography on this one versus Tranquility and see what the differences are, but we'll see. Then we had Lamy Turquoise, which again, this one's showing up very blue on camera, much like the Le Artisan's Blue Lagoon. Geez, it's just a little bit darker. I guess this isn't really considered teal, but the name is turquoise. I don't know on this one. The shading's really nice, and it's a great flow on this Lamy ink for sure. I like this one better than the Lamy Blue, but I have a bottle of the Lamy Blue, so yeah, it is what it is. Then we have J. Herbin's Emerald of Chivor. Like I said, crazy ink. It's got shimmer going on, sheen going on, and the base color of this is that beautiful dark teal color, more on the blue side. Very, very lovely ink. Definitely a favorite among many, definitely a well talked about ink, and definitely a beautiful color. So can't go wrong with it. Well flowing for Herbin, just a really cool ink. Then we have Noodler's Turquoise, which this ink is still wet. Are we surprised? I'm not. It's a beautiful color though. I do like the shading in this one, and that has a little bit of a darker red matte sheen going on. I think it's really close to the Three Oysters Marine Green, which again, this one is still a little bit wet too. So maybe that's something just consistent with these two today. But it is a nice color for sure. It's a nice deep teal color. Don't really consider this one to be turquoise just because I think that's a little bit lighter, but it does fit in this family for sure. Then we have Ferris Press's Tumultuous Tides, kind of again that aqua-y, light turquoise color. The shimmer on this one goes from like a bluish to silver, which is pretty. I just don't really reach for this one. It's not my favorite, but it is nice for a Ferris Press teal colored ink. Then we have Taccia's Sabimidori. Such a crazy ink. The sheen really took over this watch, that bright red sheen that it has, but in writing it has almost like a golden red look to it. So it's like gold, red, and blue, but no shimmer. I don't know how else to describe it. It's very chameleon-esque in writing. Really, really fun ink. Like one of my favorites. It's just a bit more out of my price range most of the time. Then we have Three Oysters Marine Green. Definitely shows a bit greener on camera, but it is more towards the same tone as that Noodler's Turquoise. These are very close together, but the sheen on this one is a bit stronger than the Noodler's, and it is a bit more red. Nice flow, very wet, probably why it is still wet on the page. Then we have Private Reserve's Blue Suede. Again, this one just reminds me of the Elvis song. It's a nice color. It doesn't have super strong shading, and it has a little bit of a red sheen, but nothing crazy. It's a nice teal ink, and it's a great price point for most people that I've seen from Private Reserve. Then we have Color versus Gravity Wave. Again, very much like the Blue Suede, just a little bit on the greener side, has a red sheen. A little bit on the dry side, though. It's not super wet in writing. Would do really well if you have a juicy pen, but I just don't really reach for this one either. And then we ended up on Organics Studios Alanine, which has a bit more of a red sheen, which is common with Organic Studio blue or green inks, in my opinion. And it is a nice flow on this one as well, and a nice darker teal color. Okay, now I'm going to flip back to season 1 of the teal inks that I did last year. and this is the selections that I went with then. We have Ferris Press's Edwards Gardens, which is very close to the J. Herbin Emerald of Chivor, and price point wise, I think Emerald of Chivor is a little bit better, but I like the color of Edwards Gardens more because it's just brighter, I guess. I also had Herbin's Bleu Calanquois, Organic Studios, Henry David Thoreau, Walden Pond, very, very sheening dark teal ink, but also really close to Van Diemen's Underwater Series Sea Turtle. These two were like dead ringers for each other. I have Monteverde's California Teal, which is a bit more on the green teal side. Inkebara's Green Lagoon, which is really nice for a more green teal versus the Inkebara's Air, which is a bit more of a blue aqua-y teal. Then we have Ferris Press's Morningside Mint, a bit more green, along with the Ultramantis and Mint Turquoise. These two are a bit more on the green side. Pilot Iroshizuku Sui Gyoku, Kobe Nunobiki Emerald, and Ferris Press's Mirror of Moraine. And then my ultimate favorite, Robert Oster River of Fire. This one's just a beautiful dark teal to write with, and the red chain just sells it for me. Other honorable mentions that I don't have swatched here are like Pilot Iroshizuku's Kujaku, which I think I have right here. I also have a bottle of this one, or even Sioro Duan Pine Tree by Pilot Iroshizuku is another great choice. And then also another honorable mention is Diamine's Inkvent 2023 or 2022, the green one, Diamine Bliss, and even I think Serendipity is on here. This one, Serendipity, it looks really sheening red, but it does have a dark teal undertone. Overall, though, lots of teal inks out there that are fantastic. I'm really happy with these pages today. I feel like we have a good range of like light to dark. And if there's any that I didn't showcase and you think are favorite teals of yours, please leave those down in the comments, because I think it's so fun when people recommend inks and then we all try them out and it's just like a really fun experience. Anyways, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and for voting on this color family. I have quite a few more colors to go through, so stay tuned for that next vote and we'll decide what color we're going to do next. But again, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.